What happens when explorers venture into the unknown and never return? When a team sets out to chart remote lands or treacherous mountains, and all contact is lost, leaving only cryptic reports behind. These are the lost explorer stories that defy explanation. Disappearances that haunt history and challenge our understanding of the world. If uncovering these mysterious journeys sparks your curiosity, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because in every episode, we'll reveal another lost explorer report that will leave you questioning what really happened. Franklin Expedition. The frozen expanse of the Canadian Arctic holds many secrets, but few are as haunting as the story of the Franklin Expedition. In 1845, two British ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, set sail under the command of Sir John Franklin. Their mission was ambitious: to navigate and chart the elusive Northwest Passage, a sea route that promised to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. For the British Empire, success meant global dominance in trade and exploration. The expedition began with optimism. Both ships were outfitted with the latest technology of the era, including reinforced hulls for ice navigation, steam engines, and provisions intended to last for years. A total of 129 officers and crew embarked on the journey. Letters sent home from Greenland, the expedition's last known stop before venturing deeper into the Arctic, reflected confidence and high spirits. After that, silence. No word was ever heard directly from Franklin or his men again. As months turned into years, anxiety grew in Britain. Families awaited news, and rescue missions were launched. Dozens of search expeditions combed the Arctic, driven both by duty and by reward, since the Admiralty offered financial incentives for information. What they discovered were fragments of a grim story. Along the desolate shores of King William Island, searchers found abandoned equipment, scattered belongings, and skeletal remains. Inuit oral histories spoke of starving men dragging sledges across the ice, and of ships trapped and eventually crushed by relentless pack ice. Some accounts suggested that in their desperation, members of the crew resorted to cannibalism, a claim later supported by forensic evidence showing cut marks on human bones. The mystery only deepened with each clue. In 1859, a note was recovered from a cairn. It revealed that Franklin had died in 1847, just 2 years into the voyage, and that the surviving crew had made the desperate decision to abandon their ships and march south in search of safety. Few, if any, survived the ordeal. For more than a century, the exact location of the ships remained unknown. Archaeologists and historians pieced together theories, but the Arctic guarded its secret well. Then, in 2014, HMS Erebus was found lying in relatively shallow waters off King William Island, remarkably preserved by the cold. Just 2 years later, HMS Terror was discovered as well, sitting upright and almost intact on the seabed. Their discovery was a breakthrough, yet it raised as many questions as it answered. Inside the ships, artifacts were found that offered glimpses into daily life aboard. Dishes still stacked, boots and clothing preserved, and even journals with pages too fragile to read. These relics suggest a story frozen in time, awaiting interpretation. But why the crew failed so catastrophically despite being well-provisioned remains unclear. Modern research points to multiple factors: lead poisoning from improperly sealed food tins, scurvy, hypothermia, and the crushing isolation of the Arctic. Together, these may have doomed even the most prepared explorers. The Franklin Expedition stands as both a cautionary tale and an enduring puzzle. It reflects the courage and hubris of an age of exploration, the determination to conquer nature, and the high price of underestimating its power. And so, even with the ships resting in silence on the ocean floor, the mystery remains alive. Did hidden journals or logs go down with the crew, waiting to be uncovered? Will the Arctic one day yield the final piece of the puzzle? The frozen North keeps its secrets well, and the story of the Franklin Expedition lingers as one of history's most chilling enigmas. HMS Erebus, the icy waters of the Canadian Arctic, conceal a story of ambition, survival, and disappearance. At the center of this mystery is HMS Erebus, a ship that once symbolized the strength of British naval exploration, now remembered as part of one of history's most haunting maritime tragedies. HMS Erebus began its life in 1826, built in Pembroke Dockyard, Wales. Originally designed as a bomb vessel, it was sturdy, reinforced to withstand the recoil of heavy mortars. Later, it was modified for polar exploration. By the 1840s, the ship was fitted with iron plating on its hull, a steam engine adapted from a locomotive and innovative technology for its time. Its mission was ambitious: to help chart the Northwest Passage, the elusive sea route through the Arctic that promised faster global trade. In 1845, Erebus and its sister ship, HMS Terror, set out under the command of Sir John Franklin. The expedition carried 129 men, provisions for 3 years, and confidence in British naval superiority. Their departure was marked with optimism and pride. Yet, after their last sighting in Baffin Bay, the expedition vanished into silence. For years, search parties scoured the Arctic. Fragments slowly emerged: abandoned camps, scattered belongings, skeletal remains. Inuit oral histories told of starving men dragging boats across the ice, of ships trapped and ultimately sinking. Evidence suggested that both Erebus and Terror had become icebound near King William Island, forcing the crew to attempt an impossible overland march to safety. The tragedy grew darker with forensic clues. Cut marks on some human bones hinted at cannibalism born of desperation. Medical examinations of recovered remains revealed high levels of lead poisoning, likely from the expedition's tinned food supply, sealed with lead solder. Illness, starvation, and the crushing Arctic environment conspired against the men. Still, questions remained. Why did some officers abandon warm, well-stocked ships? What final choices were made as hope faded? For more than a century and a half, the ships themselves lay hidden beneath the Arctic seas, their fate unknown. Then, in 2014, after years of searching, Canadian researchers discovered HMS Erebus. Resting in barely 11 meters of water, the wreck was astonishingly well preserved. Artifacts lay scattered across the seafloor: porcelain plates, a cannon, even the ship's bell. Cabins still contained personal belongings, locked drawers, and journals waiting to be deciphered. The discovery was followed in 2016 by the finding of HMS Terror, almost intact, resting quietly at the bottom of Terror Bay. Together, the two ships offered a rare time capsule of a Victorian expedition halted in its tracks. Archaeologists continue to recover and study artifacts, hoping to answer the questions that written records never revealed. Yet the mystery lingers. Why, despite their advanced preparation, did the expedition collapse so completely? Was it the environment alone, or a convergence of hidden flaws? Tainted food, disease, leadership failures, or even choices we still do not fully understand. Today, HMS Erebus rests as both a scientific treasure and a silent witness. Its timbers, preserved in icy waters, carry echoes of a journey that was meant to conquer the unknown, but instead became part of it. And as each artifact surfaces, the story deepens rather than closes. The Arctic still guards its secrets, leaving us to wonder: how much of the final chapter will ever be known, and how much will remain lost beneath the ice forever? Percy Fawcett, deep in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, a story of obsession, exploration, and disappearance has fascinated generations. The tale belongs to Colonel Percy Harrison Fawcett, a British explorer whose life was defined by his relentless search for a city he believed existed in the uncharted wilderness of Brazil. He called it simply Z. Fawcett's fascination with the Amazon began in the early 20th century. Born in 1867, he trained as a surveyor and cartographer for the British military, skills that would later make him one of the most respected explorers of his time. Unlike many who saw the Amazon as an unforgiving and hostile environment, Fawcett viewed it as a place holding secrets of ancient civilizations, waiting to be uncovered beneath the dense canopy. By 1906, he was conducting mapping expeditions in South America for the Royal Geographical Society. These early journeys exposed him to the sheer scale of the rainforest. Vast rivers that stretched beyond the horizon, towering trees that blocked out the sun, and indigenous communities who lived in ways untouched by industrial modernity. But what intrigued Fawcett most were fragments of pottery, occasional stone structures, and oral legends hinting at once thriving societies hidden in the jungle. In his notes, he described his vision of Z as an advanced city, perhaps older than known civilizations, with stone architecture, complex social systems, and a level of sophistication the Western world had yet to acknowledge in the Amazon. To Fawcett, finding Z was not only about exploration, it was about rewriting history. In 1925, at the age of 58, Fawcett launched his most ambitious expedition. He was joined by his son Jack and Jack's close friend Raleigh Rimmel. The trio set off into the Mato Grosso region of Brazil, heavily burdened with supplies but light on manpower, deliberately avoiding the large entourages that had complicated previous explorations. Fawcett believed secrecy and minimal interference were crucial for survival in the jungle. Letters sent from the expedition described optimism. Fawcett wrote to his wife Nina with confidence, assuring her that they were making progress and that the goal was within reach. His last communication, dated May 29, 1925, mentioned their plans to enter what he described as unknown territory. After that, silence. Weeks turned into months. Rescue missions were launched, but none succeeded in finding the missing men. Some returning expeditions reported hostile encounters with indigenous tribes. Others brought back conflicting accounts of Fawcett's possible fate. Rumors flourished, claims that he had been killed, that he had chosen to remain with a local community, even that he had discovered Z and decided never to return. Over the decades, countless explorers and adventurers tried to retrace Fawcett's path. Many disappeared themselves, lost to disease, starvation, or the unforgiving environment of the rainforest. The legend of Fawcett became entwined with the myth of Z, both feeding into each other, each keeping the mystery alive. Modern archaeology has revealed that the Amazon was not, as once thought, a pristine wilderness. Instead, evidence shows that large, complex societies did exist there centuries ago. Societies capable of advanced agriculture, city planning, and monumental earthworks. These discoveries suggest that Fawcett's vision, while perhaps embellished, may not have been entirely imaginary. Yet the final chapter of Percy Fawcett's story remains unwritten. His body was never found, his expedition never fully explained. What happened in those last days? Whether he perished in the jungle, found refuge with an isolated tribe, or stumbled upon the remnants of a lost civilization, remains a question without an answer. The Amazon still holds its secrets, and with it, the fate of Colonel Percy Fawcett. His disappearance stands as both a cautionary tale of obsession and a reminder that some mysteries are destined to remain just beyond our reach. Amelia Earhart's name has become inseparable from one of history's greatest aviation mysteries. In July 1937, she vanished while attempting to circumnavigate the globe, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions that still stir curiosity today. Born in Kansas in 1897, Earhart was not only a skilled pilot but also a symbol of courage and progress. She became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic in 1932, breaking barriers in an era when aviation was still in its infancy. By the mid-1930s, she was already an international icon, admired for her fearless spirit and her advocacy for women in aviation. But it was her ambitious attempt to fly around the world that sealed her place in the realm of mystery. Earhart, along with her navigator Fred Noonan, set out in a twin-engine Lockheed Electra. The journey was meticulously planned, covering nearly 29,000 miles. By late June 1937, they had completed 3/4 of the route, flying across South America, Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. The final leg, across the vast Pacific, would prove the most perilous. On July 2nd, they departed from New Guinea, heading for Howland Island, a tiny strip of land in the Central Pacific. This island, only about 2 miles long, was critical to their route, an essential refueling stop before the next stages. Despite careful planning, the challenge of finding such a remote island in an age before GPS was immense. Communication was to be maintained with the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca, stationed near Howland to guide them in. But as hours passed, radio messages from Earhart grew increasingly tense. She reported difficulties with navigation and trouble locating the island. The last confirmed transmission came around 8:43 a.m., stating, "We are on the line 157 to 337. We will repeat this message." After that, silence. Neither Earhart nor Noonan was ever heard from again. The search was immediate and extensive. The U.S. Navy deployed ships and aircraft, covering thousands of square miles of ocean. Despite the effort, no trace of the Electra or its crew was ever found. Officially, the disappearance was attributed to fuel exhaustion, with the plane likely crashing into the Pacific. Yet, the lack of physical evidence has fueled decades of speculation. Some theories suggest that Earhart and Noonan may have landed on a remote island, surviving for a time as castaways. Artifacts found on Nikumaroro Island, part of Kiribati, have reignited this possibility. Items such as a piece of aluminum matching the Electra's construction, and bones that some researchers argue could belong to a female of Earhart's stature. Others, however, dispute these claims, pointing out inconsistencies and gaps in the evidence. Another line of speculation suggests a more dramatic fate. During the height of geopolitical tension in the Pacific, some have theorized that Earhart may have been captured by Japanese forces after an emergency landing near their territory. This theory has persisted for decades, fueled by anecdotal accounts and disputed photographs, though no verifiable evidence has ever surfaced. Scientific studies continue to revisit the mystery. Advances in forensic techniques and ocean exploration have prompted new searches, with expeditions using sonar mapping and deep-sea drones to scour the ocean floor near Howland Island. Each effort carries the hope of solving a riddle nearly 90 years old, yet the ocean has kept its secrets. Amelia Earhart's disappearance remains a story of daring ambition, human perseverance, and enduring uncertainty. Whether lost to the depths of the Pacific, stranded on a forgotten shore, or caught in circumstances beyond her control, her fate continues to elude us. And perhaps that is why her story endures, because somewhere between the vast sky she conquered and the endless ocean that may have claimed her, the answer still waits, just out of reach. George Mallory, high on the slopes of the world's tallest mountain, one man's name has become forever tied to one of history's greatest unanswered questions. George Mallory, a schoolteacher, soldier, and mountaineer, set out in 1924 to conquer Mount Everest, decades before modern climbing gear and technology. Whether he succeeded or not remains one of exploration's most enduring mysteries. Born in 1886 in Cheshire, England, Mallory grew up fascinated by the landscapes of his homeland, but it was the rugged peaks of the Alps that first revealed his passion for climbing. Friends and colleagues remembered him as charismatic, daring, and utterly devoted to the mountains. His ambition, however, soon turned to Everest, a mountain that, at the time, no climber had ever stood upon. The early 20th century was an era when Everest was not just a geographical challenge, but a symbol of human determination. Mallory joined the first British expeditions to the mountain in 1921 and 1922. Those attempts brought him closer to understanding its immense dangers. Avalanches, unpredictable weather, and the thin, unforgiving air at extreme altitude. Despite setbacks, Mallory famously declared that he would continue to climb Everest because it is there. In 1924, he returned for a third attempt. This time, his partner was a younger climber, Andrew Sandy Irvine, chosen for his mechanical skill with the oxygen equipment that was still experimental in those years. On June 8th, Mallory and Irvine set out from their high camp, carrying hopes of reaching the summit. Witnesses reported glimpses of their figures climbing steadily, but then, through shifting clouds, they vanished from sight. They were never seen alive again. For decades, speculation has circled their fate. Did they turn back? Did they fall before reaching the peak? Or, most tantalizing of all, did they stand on the summit of Everest nearly 30 years before Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay achieved it in 1953? The mystery deepened in 1999, when an expedition discovered Mallory's body, astonishingly well-preserved by the cold. His clothing, equipment, and even personal letters were found. Yet one crucial item was missing: a photograph of his wife Ruth, which he had promised to leave on the summit. The absence of that photograph fueled speculation that perhaps Mallory had indeed reached the top. But evidence cuts both ways. Injuries to his body suggested a catastrophic fall, and experts debate whether his position on the mountain points to a descent from the summit, or simply a failed attempt. Irvine's body has never been found, and with it, perhaps, lies the most important clue of all. Irvine carried the camera that may contain photographic proof of their climb. Despite numerous searches, the camera has never been recovered. If it still exists, it could hold the answer to a century-old question. The story of George Mallory endures because it captures something timeless: the human desire to test limits, even when the outcome is uncertain. His disappearance on Everest is not just about one man and one mountain, but about the fine line between triumph and tragedy. Today, climbers ascending Everest often pause near the place where Mallory's body was found, reflecting on the mystery. Did he and Irvine succeed in their final push, quietly securing their place in history before the mountain claimed them? Or does the summit remain forever beyond their grasp? The clouds of Everest keep their secrets well, and somewhere among the ice and rock, the answer may still be waiting. Andrew Irvine, high on the slopes of Mount Everest, in the thin air where survival hangs by a thread, lies one of the greatest mysteries in the history of exploration. What happened to Andrew "Sandy" Irvine? In June of 1924, George Mallory and Andrew Irvine set out to achieve what no human had yet accomplished: reaching the summit of Everest. At just 22 years old, Irvine was not only the youngest member of the expedition but also its mechanical expert. His skill with equipment, particularly the experimental oxygen systems of the time, made him an invaluable companion to Mallory. Together, they represented the daring spirit of early mountaineering, attempting to conquer the world's highest peak without the advantages modern climbers rely on today. On the morning of June 8, 1924, Mallory and Irvine left their high camp at approximately 8,200 meters. Their goal was the summit, an ascent of more than 600 meters still ahead of them. The climb was brutal, the terrain unforgiving, and the weather unpredictable. Yet the pair pressed upward, carrying their rudimentary oxygen gear and sheer determination. That day, the British geologist Noel Odell, climbing lower on the mountain, reported seeing two figures ascending what he described as the final step before the summit. His sighting remains one of the most debated eyewitness accounts in mountaineering history. Did Odell truly see Mallory and Irvine near the top? Or was it a trick of distance and cloud? After that fleeting glimpse, they were never seen alive again. For decades, the question haunted climbers and historians alike. Did Mallory and Irvine succeed in reaching the summit nearly 3 decades before Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay in 1953? If so, history would need to be rewritten. Search expeditions have tried to answer this riddle. In 1933, an ice axe believed to belong to Irvine was discovered at around 8,460 meters, not far from the Northeast Ridge route. This finding suggested tragedy struck during their descent. But without physical evidence of Irvine's body, certainty remained elusive. Then, in 1999, a breakthrough occurred. An American team discovered the body of George Mallory, astonishingly well-preserved by the icy conditions. His position on the mountain suggested a fatal fall, and yet, crucially, there was no sign of Irvine. Even more intriguing was the absence of Mallory's camera, which some believe had been carried by Irvine. If found, that camera could potentially contain photographs proving whether the summit was reached. The search for Irvine intensified after Mallory's discovery. Multiple expeditions combed the upper slopes of Everest, driven by the hope that his remains, and perhaps the missing camera, might emerge from the ice. Yet, despite tantalizing clues and rumors of sightings, Irvine has never been conclusively located. The mystery endures not only because of the missing body but because of what it represents. At its heart is the question of human achievement. Were Mallory and Irvine the true first conquerors of Everest? Or did they fall short only to be immortalized by the attempt? Even today, in the age of satellite technology and global expeditions, the fate of Andrew Irvine remains hidden in the snow and stone of Everest's unforgiving slopes. Somewhere up there, perhaps preserved beneath ice and rock, lies a secret waiting to be uncovered. a secret that could forever change the story of the mountain. Until that day, Irvine remains more than a lost climber. He stands as a symbol of ambition, endurance, and the unanswered questions that make history so compelling. And so, the summit of Everest does not just belong to those who stand upon it today. It also belongs to the shadows of Mallory and Irvine, whose final steps remain suspended in mystery. Roald Amundsen was a man who lived for exploration, and ultimately, he became a mystery himself. Known as the first person to lead a successful expedition to the South Pole, his life was marked by daring journeys into the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Yet, it is not only his triumphs that keep his name alive, but also the unexplained circumstances surrounding his disappearance. Born in 1872 in Norway, Amundsen grew up captivated by stories of polar explorers. From an early age, he was determined to push the limits of human endurance. By 1911, his name entered history books when he and his team planted the Norwegian flag at the South Pole, beating Robert Falcon Scott's British expedition by just weeks. This achievement solidified his reputation as one of the greatest explorers of his time. But Amundsen's ambitions went beyond Antarctica. He pursued the Northwest Passage, becoming the first to navigate it successfully by ship. Later, he turned to the air, experimenting with airplanes and dirigibles as new ways to conquer the polar regions. His career showed not only bravery, but also a restlessness, an inability to stop chasing the edges of the unknown. The turning point came in June 1928. An Italian airship called the Italia, led by General Umberto Nobile, crashed during a polar expedition. Rescue efforts were launched and Amundsen volunteered to help. Despite his advanced age and years of experience, he was still willing to risk everything in the name of exploration and humanity. On June 18, 1928, Amundsen boarded a French Latham 47 seaplane with 5 others. Their mission was to locate survivors of the crash. They took off from Tromsø, Norway, and vanished into the Arctic sky. Search parties scoured the region, but only a few fragments of the seaplane's wreckage were ever discovered, washed up along the coast of northern Norway. The bodies of Amundsen and his crew were never found. Theories about what happened range from sudden fog and disorientation to mechanical failure, or even the possibility that the plane was forced down onto the ice and drifted away with the currents. The Arctic, vast and merciless, keeps its secrets well. What makes Amundsen's disappearance particularly haunting is that it occurred in the very kind of environment he had spent his life mastering. He had survived countless dangers before: freezing storms, hunger, exhaustion, and yet, in the end, he was claimed by the same wilderness that had defined his existence. His vanishing was not the result of reckless adventure, but of his determination to help others, to rescue fellow explorers from the same perils he had long endured. Today, the story of Roald Amundsen is remembered not just as one of conquest and exploration, but also as a reminder of how fragile even the greatest pioneers are against the forces of nature. His name is etched into history, yet his final resting place remains unknown. And so, the man who once planted a flag at the most remote corner of the Earth became part of a mystery that endures. Somewhere in the Arctic expanse lies the answer, hidden beneath shifting ice and endless sea, waiting to be discovered, or perhaps, meant to remain untold. La Pérouse expedition in 1785, 2 French frigates set sail from Brest, carrying with them an ambitious mission. Commanded by Jean-François de Gallup, Comte de La Pérouse, the expedition sought to rival the legendary voyages of Captain James Cook. Its purpose was both scientific and political: to chart unknown territories, study distant cultures, and secure France's presence on the global stage of exploration. The journey began with promise. The ships, La Boussole and L'Astrolabe, crossed the Atlantic, navigated the vast Pacific, and visited regions as far apart as Alaska, California, Japan, Korea, and Australia. At each port, the expedition meticulously recorded geographical data, botanical samples, and anthropological observations. These were not merely explorers but scientists of their age, mapping coastlines, measuring currents, and documenting cultures with remarkable detail. By 1787, their work had already produced an invaluable archive of discoveries. Yet the expedition was also marked by hardship. In Samoa, conflict with islanders led to the death of several crew members. In the harsh climates of the North Pacific, storms battered the ships and supplies dwindled. Still, La Perouse pressed on, committed to completing the mission entrusted to him by King Louis XVI. In early 1788, the two frigates anchored at Botany Bay in New South Wales, where the newly arrived British First Fleet was establishing a penal colony. For a brief moment, the paths of French and British explorers crossed. La Perouse left letters, journals, and maps with the British, ensuring at least part of his mission would survive should disaster strike. It was the last time Europeans would ever see the expedition alive. After departing Australia, La Perouse and his men vanished. No signals, no sightings, no messages ever reached France. Their disappearance became one of the great maritime mysteries of the 18th century. Even King Louis XVI, on the eve of the French Revolution, is said to have asked, "What has become of La Perouse?" For decades, speculation swirled. Some believed the ships had been lost in storms. Others imagined they had been wrecked on distant, uncharted reefs. Expeditions were launched in search of answers, but the Pacific remained silent, guarding its secrets. It was not until 1826, almost 40 years later, that clues began to emerge. An Irish sea captain, Peter Dillon, discovered European artifacts on Vanikoro, an island in the Solomon Chain. Local accounts told of two great ships wrecked upon the reefs decades earlier. Survivors, they said, had struggled ashore, some eventually building a smaller vessel and attempting to escape once more into the ocean's vastness. Later expeditions confirmed the findings. Remnants of anchors, cannons, and French equipment were recovered from Vanikoro's waters. These relics told a tragic story. La Boussole and L'Astrolabe had both run aground on the reefs, shattered by the relentless surf. Some of the crew perished in the wrecks. Others survived for a time on the island. Their ultimate fate remains unclear. Did any of them reach safety, or were they swallowed, one, by the sea and the island's isolation? Today, the La Perouse expedition stands as both a triumph and a tragedy of exploration. Its meticulous records, saved by chance in Australia, continue to offer insights into the world of the late 18th century. Yet the unanswered questions surrounding its end keep the story alive. The reefs of Vanikoro hold their secrets still, fragments of wood and iron lying silent beneath the waves. The mystery of La Perouse is a reminder that exploration often walked hand in hand with loss. In the quest to chart the unknown, entire lives could vanish into history's shadows, leaving behind only traces for future generations to uncover. What exactly became of those survivors on Vanikoro? Did any escape beyond the horizon? The ocean keeps its silence, and the answers remain just out of reach. Henry Hudson in the early 1600s, European powers were desperate to find a faster trade route to Asia. The seas were uncharted, the dangers immense, but the rewards promised wealth beyond imagination. Among the bold navigators of this era was Hudson, an Englishman whose voyages carved his place into history, and whose final expedition ended in silence and speculation. In 1607, Hudson set out under the flag of the Muscovy Company, tasked with finding a northeast passage across the Arctic. The icy barriers of the polar seas stopped him, but the attempt marked him as a determined navigator willing to test the limits of the known world. The following year, he tried again, with the same result: ice, cold, and failure. Yet his persistence drew the attention of the Dutch East India Company, who hired him in 1609. This third voyage would carry Hudson westward. Instead of battling Arctic ice, he crossed the Atlantic and steered into the waters of North America. Here, he sailed up the great river that now bears his name, the Hudson River, believing briefly that it might lead to the Pacific. Although it did not, the journey established a Dutch claim in the New World, laying the foundation for what would become New Amsterdam and later New York. But Hudson's final voyage in 1610 would bring him to the edge of discovery and disappearance. Commissioned by England's Virginia Company and the British East India Company, he sailed aboard the Discovery in search of the Northwest Passage. That summer, Hudson and his crew ventured into what is now known as Hudson Bay. They pushed deeper into the vast inland sea, convinced it might open toward Asia. As the months dragged on, the icy waters closed in. The crew grew restless. Food supplies dwindled. Winter in the bay was merciless, trapping the ship in frozen seas for months. Tensions flared, fueled by hunger, fear, and the relentless cold. Hudson, determined to continue the search, clashed with men who longed only to return home. In June 1611, the crisis reached its breaking point. According to surviving accounts, the crew mutinied. Hudson, his teenage son, and several loyal sailors were forced into a small open boat and cast adrift on the frigid waters. The Discovery sailed away, and Henry Hudson was never seen again. What happened next remains uncertain. Some believe he perished quickly, swallowed by the bay's unforgiving expanse. Others suggest he may have reached land, living briefly among indigenous communities before vanishing from record. No trace of Hudson, his son, or their companions was ever found. The mutineers returned to England, where they faced trial. Yet, despite evidence of desertion and betrayal, few faced punishment. The absence of Hudson himself left the story incomplete, an unfinished tale written on the ice and waves. Today, Henry Hudson's name is etched across maps. The Hudson River, Hudson Bay, the Hudson Strait. His voyages shaped the course of exploration and colonization in North America. But his disappearance stands as a haunting reminder of the perils faced by those who sought to push the boundaries of the known world. And so the question lingers, suspended in history. Did Henry Hudson vanish into the frozen silence of the Arctic, or did his journey continue, unseen and unrecorded? The answer remains adrift, like his final boat, somewhere in the endless waters of the North. Charles Francis Hall, born in 1821, Hall was not a trained explorer by profession. He began his career as a printer and engraver in the United States. But by the mid-19th century, his fascination with the icy North had grown into an obsession. At a time when nations were racing to uncover the secrets of the Arctic, Hall set his sights on the fate of Sir John Franklin's lost expedition. Hall's early journeys were marked by determination rather than formal training. With limited resources, he traveled to the far north, living among Inuit communities. Unlike many explorers of his time, Hall relied on indigenous knowledge, learning survival skills and gathering oral accounts that pointed toward clues of Franklin's missing ships. These expeditions earned him recognition, eventually leading to his most ambitious undertaking, the Polaris Expedition of 1871. The Polaris Expedition was designed to reach the North Pole, a goal that had eluded explorers for centuries. Hall commanded the voyage, backed by the U.S. government. The ship, Polaris, carried a diverse crew, including sailors, scientists, and Inuit guides. At first, the journey seemed promising. The expedition advanced further north than many before them. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Disagreements over leadership, cultural clashes, and strained discipline spread through the crew. By October 1871, events took a dark turn. Hall suddenly fell ill after drinking a cup of coffee. Symptoms escalated rapidly. Vomiting, delirium, and a decline so severe that he suspected he had been poisoned. Within days, Charles Francis Hall was dead. Official reports at the time listed apoplexy, a stroke, as the cause. Yet whispers of foul play persisted. Some claimed he was deliberately poisoned, pointing toward rivalries within the expedition and conflicts with the ship's physician, Dr. Emil Bessels. For over a century, the truth remained uncertain. But in the 1960s, scientists exhumed Hall's body from the frozen ground of Greenland. Tests revealed alarmingly high levels of arsenic in his remains. The discovery reignited debate. Was Hall the victim of murder, or had arsenic been part of the medicines commonly used at the time? The evidence suggested intentional poisoning, but no definitive conclusion could be drawn. Meanwhile, the fate of the Polaris expedition itself mirrored the chaos of Hall's final days. After his death, leadership faltered. The ship became trapped in ice, and the crew splintered. One group survived by drifting for 6 months on an ice floe before being rescued, while others struggled in near starvation. Hall's death cast a long shadow, leaving behind not only a mystery of cause, but also a symbol of how fragile human ambition can be against the backdrop of the Arctic. Today, Charles Francis Hall is remembered as both a determined visionary and a figure caught in a web of unanswered questions. His expeditions advanced knowledge of the North, yet his untimely death turned him into one of exploration's enduring enigmas. And so, the mystery endures. Was Hall silenced by natural illness, or by human hands in the frozen heart of the Arctic? The truth lies buried in ice and silence, where history meets uncertainty. Franklin Search HMS Investigator in the mid-19th century, the Arctic became the stage for one of the most relentless quests in naval history. At the center of it was the Franklin Expedition, a voyage that vanished into the icy wilderness, and the desperate search efforts that followed. Among those missions was the journey of HMS Investigator, a ship whose own story of endurance and entrapment has become a mystery in its own right. Commissioned in 1848, Investigator was tasked with locating Sir John Franklin's lost expedition, which had disappeared while attempting to chart the Northwest Passage. Commanded by Captain Robert McClure, the vessel set out with high hopes of solving one of the greatest maritime puzzles of the age. But the Arctic is a place where ambition collides with unforgiving reality. Before long, Investigator herself became ensnared in the very dangers she had been sent to confront. Sailing through treacherous waters, the ship navigated narrow straits and ice-choked passages in Canada's far north. McClure and his crew pressed forward, hoping to discover a trace of Franklin's ships, Erebus and Terror. Yet as the seasons turned, the Arctic tightened its icy grip. By 1851, Investigator was trapped in the pack ice of Mercy Bay on Banks Island, unable to move. The crew endured years of isolation. Supplies dwindled. The endless polar night magnified both physical hardship and psychological strain. Records and journals describe the gradual decline. Men weakened by scurvy, morale strained by hunger and uncertainty. They were explorers turned prisoners, bound not by chains but by walls of unyielding ice. What makes the story remarkable is that in this desolation, McClure's men managed to achieve something extraordinary. Sledging parties pushed across the ice, eventually linking known routes from the west and east. This confirmed the existence of the Northwest Passage, a geographic connection explorers had sought for centuries. Yet their triumph came at a staggering cost. Survival balanced on a knife's edge, dependent on the faint hope of rescue. That rescue finally arrived in 1853, when searchers from HMS Resolute and HMS Intrepid reached the stranded crew. Starving but alive, McClure and his men were evacuated, leaving Investigator to her fate. Abandoned, she remained locked in ice, gradually sinking into obscurity. For over 150 years, the resting place of HMS Investigator remained a question mark. It wasn't until 2010 that Parks Canada archaeologists, guided by Inuit oral history, rediscovered her wreck in Mercy Bay. Lying upright in shallow water, preserved by the Arctic cold, the ship offered a rare time capsule of an era when the Arctic was still an uncharted frontier. Artifacts, wooden structures, and even parts of her rigging remained intact, silent witnesses to a voyage both heroic and tragic. And yet, despite this discovery, many questions linger. The Franklin expedition itself would remain unsolved for decades longer, with the wrecks of Erebus and Terror only found in the 21st century. The story of HMS Investigator is inseparable from that greater mystery, a reminder of how the search for one lost expedition created another tale of survival, abandonment, and rediscovery. In the end, Investigator embodies both triumph and tragedy, the proof of the Northwest Passage, but also the stark reminder of what it cost. Beneath the Arctic waters, she still rests, an enduring monument to the explorers who ventured too far into the unknown, and to the mysteries that the ice continues to keep. Martin Frobisher missing reports in the late 16th century, when European explorers were racing across uncharted seas. One man stood out for his bold attempts to unlock the Northwest Passage, Martin Frobisher. An English seafarer, adventurer, and privateer, Frobisher made 3 voyages to the Arctic between 1576 and 1578. But behind the chronicles of his expeditions lies a curious puzzle: the missing reports, documents, and records that should have detailed his journeys discoveries, and outcomes, yet never surfaced or were lost to time. Frobisher's first voyage set out in 1576 under the commission of the Muscovy Company, with the aim of finding a direct route to Asia through the frozen north. He reached the forbidding coasts of what is today Canada, exploring parts of Baffin Island. Accounts note that he brought back what was believed to be gold or sparking enormous interest back home. But already, inconsistencies appeared in the surviving documentation. Several of his men vanished in the Arctic, their fates never clarified, and the official records that might have explained what happened were either incomplete or mysteriously absent. On his second voyage in 1577, Frobisher returned with a fleet of ships, intent on gathering more of the glittering rock thought to be gold. This time, over 100 tons of or were transported back to England. But curiously, the reports from crew members and officials diverge. Some described hostile encounters with Inuit communities. Others painted the landscape in more favorable terms. Yet, official expedition logs that should have clarified events went missing. What remained were conflicting accounts and scattered testimonies. Fragments that hinted at disputes, hardships, and possibly concealed losses. By the third voyage in 1578, the expedition had grown to over a dozen ships and hundreds of men. This was no longer just a voyage of discovery. It had become a mining operation, with the dream of extracting immense wealth from the Arctic. Frobisher even attempted to establish a settlement on the desolate shores. But here too, the reports that could have provided clear details on the struggles, the illnesses, the desertions, and the failures of the settlement are incomplete. The settlement collapsed almost immediately, and the so-called gold, or was later revealed to be worthless iron pyrite. The mystery deepens when historians examine the official archives of the period. In the meticulous record-keeping culture of Elizabethan England, where navigational details, crew lists, and financial accounts were carefully logged, the gaps around Frobisher's expeditions stand out. What happened to the missing reports? Were they deliberately destroyed to cover up the failure of a costly venture? Did investors, embarrassed by the fiasco, suppress the evidence? Or were the documents simply lost in the centuries that followed, casualties of time, fire, or neglect? There are also hints of more personal intrigue. Some sources suggest rivalries among Frobisher's contemporaries, other explorers and financiers, who may have had reasons to discredit him or minimize his achievements. Others point to the harsh realities of the voyages themselves. The freezing Arctic waters, scurvy, hunger, and the deadly encounters that left men dead or unaccounted for. Without the missing reports, the true scale of hardship and loss remains concealed. Today, what survives of Frobisher's story is pieced together from scattered letters, second-hand narratives, and archaeological discoveries in the Canadian Arctic. Researchers have unearthed traces of the failed settlement, remnants of building foundations, discarded equipment, and human remains. These physical clues provide a silent testimony to what the missing papers might once have revealed in detail. Yet the absence of the reports leaves more questions than answers. Was Martin Frobisher a determined visionary undone by circumstance, or an opportunist who led hundreds into hardship for fool's gold? Did the missing documents vanish through accident, or was their disappearance intentional, erasing uncomfortable truths? In the end, the mystery of Martin Frobisher's missing reports is not just about an explorer and his voyages. It is about how history itself is written, and how much of it can disappear, leaving behind silence where answers should have been. Roanoke Colony in the late 16th century, on the windswept coast of what is now North Carolina, an English settlement was founded that would soon vanish without explanation. This place became known to history as the Lost Colony of Roanoke. The story begins in 1585, when Sir Walter Raleigh received a charter from Queen Elizabeth, the first to establish England's first permanent foothold in the New World. After an initial, short-lived attempt, a second expedition was organized in 1587 under the leadership of John White. This time, more than 100 men, women, and children set sail, families determined to build a new life across the Atlantic. The colony was established on Roanoke Island. For a brief moment, optimism was high. Houses were built, fields were cleared, and the colonists began forging connections with some of the indigenous tribes in the region. In August of that year, Eleanor Dare, the daughter of John White, gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in North America. But difficulties soon mounted. Supplies were dwindling, tensions with local tribes escalated, and the settlers' survival came into question. Faced with a dire situation, John White sailed back to England to gather reinforcements and much-needed provisions. His departure in 1587 was meant to be temporary. However, events in Europe changed everything. England was preparing for war with Spain, and the looming threat of the Spanish Armada delayed White's return. What should have been a quick resupply mission stretched into 3 long years. By the time White finally secured passage back to Roanoke in 1590, the settlement was deserted. What he found has haunted historians ever since. The houses had been dismantled, and there were no signs of struggle, fire, or battle. No graves were discovered. The only clue was a single word carved into a post: Croton. Another carving, simply CRO, was etched into a nearby tree. The word referred to the Croton Island, today known as Hatteras Island, and the people who lived there. White took it as a possible sign that the colonists had relocated, but storms and dwindling supplies prevented him from investigating further. He never saw the settlers again. Over the centuries, countless theories have attempted to explain the disappearance. Some suggest the colonists integrated with local tribes, supported by reports of later encounters with indigenous communities whose members had European features or spoke English words. Others believe disease, famine, or a hostile attack may have wiped them out. Still others propose they attempted to sail back to England on their own, only to be lost at sea. Archaeological digs have uncovered tantalizing fragments. European-style tools and pottery scattered far from Roanoke Island, raising the possibility that the colonists dispersed into smaller groups and moved inland. Yet no definitive evidence has ever confirmed their fate. The Roanoke mystery remains one of the oldest unsolved puzzles in American history. It is a story of hope, struggle, and disappearance. A settlement that began with the promise of a new beginning and ended in silence. To this day, the question lingers: what happened to the lost colony? Were they absorbed into neighboring tribes, victims of misfortune, or wanderers whose trail vanished into the vast wilderness of the New World? Perhaps the answer still lies buried beneath the sands of the Carolina coast, waiting for the right discovery to bring it to light. Until then, the word carved into the wood Croton remains not just a clue, but a haunting reminder of lives lost to time. James Knight, a name once familiar in the world of exploration, now remembered mostly for the mystery that surrounds his final voyage. In the early 18th century, Knight was a seasoned trader and governor for the Hudson's Bay Company, a man deeply involved in the expansion of commerce across the Arctic frontiers. But in 1719, at the age of 70, he embarked on an expedition that would become one of history's enduring puzzles. Knight's mission was clear: to find the fabled Northwest Passage, a route believed to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the Arctic. With 2 ships, the Albany and the Discovery, he set sail from England. Both vessels were well provisioned, carrying not just sailors but carpenters, laborers, and supplies meant for establishing trading posts along the way. It was an ambitious journey, one that promised immense wealth and prestige if successful. Yet the passage Knight pursued had already claimed the hopes of countless others. The Arctic was treacherous, its icy waters unpredictable, and the maps of the time left more questions than answers. What is striking is that, after leaving England, the expedition simply vanished. For years, no news of Knight, his men, or his ships reached Europe. Whispers circulated. Had the expedition perished in storms, been crushed by ice, or encountered resistance from indigenous groups? Decades later, fragments of the story began to surface. Inuit oral histories told of 2 large ships wrecked in the far north, their crews struggling ashore. Accounts spoke of desperate men searching for food, building shelters, and then disappearing into the harsh wilderness. Archaeological evidence eventually confirmed parts of these tales. Relics believed to belong to Knight's expedition, tools, weapon fragments, and ship timbers were discovered near Marble Island, off the coast of present-day Nunavut, Canada. The findings painted a grim picture. It appeared that both ships had been trapped and wrecked in ice. Survivors made it ashore, but starvation and exposure would have been relentless. Inuit witnesses described the men growing weaker, some succumbing to illness, others perhaps to despair. There are no signs that Knight or his crew ever managed to return south. And yet, uncertainties remain. No written records from the expedition have ever been recovered. Did Knight keep a log that lies buried beneath the Arctic permafrost, waiting to be discovered? Could the remains of the ships still rest on the seabed, holding untold clues? Even with archaeological discoveries, the full story of what happened in those final months continues to elude historians. James Knight's fate is more than a tragic tale of exploration. It is a reminder of the risks taken in pursuit of knowledge and ambition. His disappearance echoes the larger saga of the Northwest Passage, a dream that lured explorers for centuries, often to their doom. What we are left with is a haunting image: 2 ships locked in the ice, crews scattered across a barren island, and an old man, once a powerful figure of commerce, spending his final days staring across the frozen horizon. The Arctic, vast and silent, keeps the last word in James Knight's story, and so the mystery endures. Was Knight's end inevitable, or is there still a hidden chapter of his journey yet to be uncovered beneath the ice? Lewis and Clark. The story of Lewis and Clark stands as one of the greatest journeys of exploration in American history. Commissioned by President Thomas Jefferson in 1803, their mission was simple in design but monumental in scope: to chart the newly acquired Louisiana Territory, to map a route to the Pacific Ocean, and to record the people, plants, animals, and geography of a land that was, for Americans at the time, largely unknown. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, accompanied by their Corps of Discovery, set out in May of 1804. Over the course of more than 2 years, they traveled nearly 8,000 miles, enduring harsh winters, dangerous rivers, and encounters with dozens of indigenous nations. Their expedition produced maps and journals that transformed the understanding of the continent. Yet, behind the triumph of their journey lies a darker, lingering mystery. What truly happened to Meriwether Lewis? Lewis was not only a skilled leader and naturalist, but also a man haunted by private struggles. After the expedition, Jefferson appointed him governor of the Upper Louisiana Territory, a position of immense responsibility. But Lewis soon faced financial troubles, political disputes, and growing isolation. By 1809, he was traveling toward Washington, D.C., determined to defend his reputation. Along that road, at a remote inn known as Grinder's Stand in Tennessee, Lewis met a sudden and violent end. The accounts are conflicting. On the morning of October 11, 1809, Lewis was found with multiple gunshot wounds. Officially, his death was recorded as a suicide. Eyewitnesses at the inn described his final hours as those of a tormented man, speaking incoherently and pacing restlessly. His own writings suggest a man struggling with depression, perhaps even paranoia. This has led many historians to accept the idea that Lewis took his own life. Yet doubts have never disappeared. Some argued that the wounds on his body did not match the pattern of suicide. Questions were raised about whether an intruder could have been responsible. Others suggested that Lewis, carrying important government papers and unfinished manuscripts of the expedition journals, may have been murdered for robbery. Adding to the mystery are the decades of debate that followed. Family members, including his mother, insisted that he was killed. Several contemporaries described him as mentally unwell, but others painted a portrait of a man under immense external pressure, yet still driven by duty and a desire to complete his work. Even the location of his grave became part of the uncertainty, as reports over time conflicted about the state of his remains and whether his body showed signs of violence beyond self-inflicted wounds. The enigma of Lewis's death casts a long shadow over the triumph of the expedition. The journals he left behind remain a treasure trove of discovery, documenting over 200 species new to science and providing detailed accounts of the landscapes of the American West. Clark, meanwhile, lived on to serve as a respected governor of Missouri Territory, preserving the memory of their journey. But Lewis's end stands as an unresolved chapter, a sharp contrast to the spirit of discovery that defined his life. Over 2 centuries later, historians, forensic experts, and descendants of the explorers still debate the question. Was Meriwether Lewis a man undone by his own demons, or the victim of foul play on a lonely stretch of wilderness road? The truth lies buried in history, leaving us only with fragments of testimony, scattered reports, and the enduring uncertainty of one of America's most enduring mysteries. Sir Samuel Hearne. In the late 18th century, exploration was more than ambition. It was survival for empires seeking trade routes and resources. Among those who ventured into the uncharted northern wilderness of Canada was Sir Samuel Hearne, a man whose name remains tied to one of the most debated and unsettling episodes in the history of exploration. Born in London in 1745, Hearne began his career at sea with the Royal Navy before joining the Hudson's Bay Company. At that time, the company sought a passage to the northern oceans and hoped to discover copper deposits that indigenous accounts had long described. Hearne, young and determined, was sent inland in 1769 to lead an expedition that would take him far from the fortified trading posts into the vast, frozen expanse of northern Canada. The journeys were grueling. Hearne's first attempts ended in failure. Harsh conditions, lack of supplies, and desertion by guides forced him to return. But in his third attempt, guided by Chippewayan leader Matanabe, Hearne pressed deeper into the barren lands. He became the first European to cross the treeline of northern Canada and reach the Coppermine River, recording landscapes that no outsider had documented before. His journals detailed not just geography, but also the ways of life of the Dene and Inuit people. Yet, at the heart of Hearne's legacy lies a moment of darkness that still stirs debate. In July 1771, as the expedition reached the Coppermine River, Hearne witnessed a brutal attack by his indigenous companions on a group of Inuit. Known later as the Bloody Falls Massacre, the event was recorded in his journal with unsettling detail. Hearne described the sudden assault, the cries, and the aftermath in words that left no doubt of its horror. Historians continue to examine his account. Some argue that Hearne exaggerated the violence to emphasize the dangers of northern life, while others believe his description was understated, a restrained version of something even more brutal. What remains certain is that Hearne, powerless to intervene, stood as one of the few Europeans to witness such a moment of cultural conflict in that era. His return to England years later brought recognition. His writings, published as a journey from Prince of Wales's fort in Hudson's Bay to the Northern Ocean, became a cornerstone of Arctic exploration literature. The book not only mapped unknown territories, but also offered ethnographic observations that gave European readers their first extended glimpse into northern indigenous cultures. Some praised the precision of his maps, which would guide explorers for decades. Others, however, questioned the objectivity of his accounts, noting inconsistencies and his reliance on memory when his original notes were lost during the American Revolutionary War. Hearne's later life saw him return to Canada, where he became governor of Prince of Wales's fort. Ironically, the fort he commanded was destroyed in 1782 by French forces, leaving him once again at the mercy of forces beyond his control. He died quietly in 1792, far from the wilderness that had defined his fame. But his story remains unsettled. Was Samuel Hearne a careful observer whose words preserved the stark realities of northern life? Or was he a flawed narrator whose accounts blurred memory, trauma, and political necessity? His journals leave behind not just maps and ethnography, but a lingering question about truth, perspective, and the costs of exploration. In the silence of the Arctic rivers, one can still imagine the echoes of that fateful summer in 1771, where discovery, survival, and violence became inseparably intertwined. And it is there, in those frozen lands, that Hearne's legacy continues to cast a shadow, refusing to fully fade. Frank Wild's name often drifts in the shadows of polar exploration, just behind the towering figure of Ernest Shackleton. Yet, his story holds mysteries of endurance, loyalty, and obscurity that still puzzle historians today. Born in 1873 in Yorkshire, England, Wild began his career as a sailor in the Royal Navy. His path eventually led him into the heart of the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, where he became one of the most traveled men across the icy frontier. He served on 5 major expeditions to Antarctica, more than almost any other explorer. But despite this extraordinary record, his legacy is strangely fragmented, his name less celebrated than those he served alongside. Wild's first journey south came in 1901 with Robert Falcon Scott's Discovery Expedition. He quickly proved himself as resilient and capable, enduring brutal conditions while maintaining a steady presence that others relied upon. But it was his later association with Shackleton that defined him. On the Nimrod expedition of 1907 to 1909, Wild was part of the team that came within just 97 miles of the South Pole, a near triumph that etched Shackleton into history, but left Wild as a supporting figure. His greatest test came during the infamous Endurance expedition of 1914 to 1916. When Shackleton's ship was trapped and eventually crushed by ice, it was Wild who held the stranded men together. As second in command, he kept discipline, rationed food, and sustained morale during the endless months of isolation. Accounts from survivors describe his calmness, his dry humor, and his unwavering faith in Shackleton's leadership. When Shackleton set out on an impossible journey across the Southern Ocean to seek rescue, it was Frank Wild who was left in charge. For 4 long months, he kept the group alive on Elephant Island, insisting they be ready to depart at a moment's notice. His persistence paid off. When Shackleton finally returned, every man was still alive. One might expect such devotion and skill to secure Wild a permanent place in the annals of exploration. Yet his post-expedition years tell a different story. Unlike Shackleton or Scott, Wild never achieved fame, wealth, or lasting recognition. After Shackleton's death in 1922, Wild joined one final journey, Shackleton's Quest expedition. Shackleton died suddenly aboard ship, and with him went the last of Wild's opportunities to share the spotlight. Returning to England, Wild found civilian life far harsher than the polar wastes. He struggled with financial difficulties, bouts of depression, and an uneasy attempt at farming in South Africa. Friends recalled a man adrift, whose identity had been bound so closely to Shackleton that without him, Wild seemed incomplete. In 1939, at the age of 66, Frank Wild died in relative obscurity in Johannesburg, his grave left unmarked for decades. It wasn't until 2011 that a remarkable twist revived his memory. Researchers located his forgotten ashes, and they were reinterred on the island of South Georgia, next to Shackleton's grave. For many, it felt like a symbolic reunion, the loyal lieutenant finally resting beside the leader he had served with unshakable dedication. And yet, questions linger. Why did a man who contributed so much to exploration fade so completely from memory? Was it simply the shadow of Shackleton's fame, or was Wild himself content to remain in the background, quietly carrying the burdens of leadership without seeking recognition? Frank Wild's life remains a reminder that history often celebrates the figure at the front, while those who hold everything together are quietly overlooked. In the windswept silence of South Georgia, his story still waits, half hidden, like the icebound landscapes he once endured, leaving us to wonder how many other lives of quiet heroism lie forgotten in the margins of history. William John Wills, remembered as one of the central figures of the ill-fated Burke and Wills expedition, left behind a story that is both a testament to human ambition and a reminder of the perils of exploration. His journey across the uncharted heart of Australia in the 1860s remains one of history's enduring mysteries. Born in Devon, England in 1834, Wills was the son of a physician. He studied surveying and navigation, disciplines that would later make him an invaluable asset. In 1853, he sailed with his family to Australia, a land that seemed to offer boundless opportunities. By the end of the decade, Wills was working as a surveyor in Melbourne, admired for his diligence and precision. When the Royal Society of Victoria announced an expedition to cross the Australian continent from south to north, Wills was appointed surveyor, astronomer, and third-in-command under Robert O'Hara Burke. Their mission, to map a route from Melbourne to the Gulf of Carpentaria, opening a path for communication, trade, and settlement. It was a challenge that promised both glory and danger. The expedition set out in August 1860, laden with an extraordinary amount of equipment, carts, camels, horses, and provisions. The caravan stretched for nearly 2 miles. Yet behind its grandeur lay poor planning and leadership conflicts. Burke, though courageous, lacked experience in bush survival. Wills, in contrast, brought scientific discipline and an analytical mind, carefully recording observations and astronomical data along the way. As the group advanced into the arid interior, the land grew harsher and the difficulties multiplied. The oppressive heat, lack of water, and dwindling supplies began to take their toll. At Menindee, disagreements led to desertions. Despite these setbacks, Burke and Wills pressed onward, determined to reach the northern coast. In December 1860, a smaller party of 4, including Burke, Wills, John King, and Charles Gray, set off from Cooper Creek on a desperate dash to the Gulf. They succeeded in reaching the northern mangrove swamps in February 1861, becoming the first Europeans to cross the continent from south to north. But success came at a price. Exhausted and weakened, they faced the far more dangerous challenge of returning. On the way back, Gray died. The remaining 3 struggled southward, arriving at Cooper Creek only to discover that the support party had left just hours earlier. Supplies were buried under a marked tree, but without fresh help, their chances of survival dwindled. Wills remained committed to documenting events even in his final days. His journals reveal a man calm and reflective, recording astronomical readings and notes on their dire situation with remarkable composure. He weakened rapidly from starvation and exposure. In late June 1861, too feeble to continue, Wills asked Burke and King to leave him behind in a shelter by the creek. He died soon after, alone but still a scientist to the end. Search parties later recovered his body, along with his meticulously kept field notes. These journals became an enduring legacy, offering historians a window into the final weeks of the expedition. Today, Wills is remembered not only for his role in a tragic venture, but also for his quiet perseverance and devotion to science in the harshest conditions. Yet questions remain. Could the expedition have succeeded with better leadership? Did Wills foresee the disaster unfolding but remain loyal to his commander? And what thoughts filled his mind as he wrote those last careful lines under the fading light of the Australian desert? The story of William John Wills endures not simply because of how it ended, but because of the mystery it leaves behind, of ambition, endurance, and the fragile line between triumph and tragedy.